Hey everybody, it's Monday, and I barely remembered it's Monday because I got to this evening and I said, oh, it's Monday and I gotta make a video. So here I am making a video just right in time before it's Tuesday. So today I'm going to talk to you about college and work and how they can affect eating disorders. And in fact, I'd like to extend that to any major life change such as moving, marriage, having babies. All of these life changes can trigger eating disorder, especially if you've had them in the past. And college, especially, is a very vulnerable time because that's a time when suddenly you're faced with a lot of responsibilities in a completely different world. And I remember, in high school, there's all these, it's smaller and it seems like everybody has their set of friends and their little cliques, and they can be good or bad depending on what your situation is. But then suddenly you go to college, most likely none of your old friends from high school are there, and if they are, you're some people are lucky enough to have them as roommates, but even still, you're off in a bigger world. And when you go to college, it's like nobody really cares about what anybody else is doing. They're so involved with their own lives that there's you don't find all the same things that go on in high school with dating and drama and friendships. And, in some ways this is good, and in other ways it can be scary if you've never experienced before, because suddenly you feel lost, and that doesn't help when you already may be having identity issues. And a lot of people who have eating disorders have trouble identifying themselves outside of an eating disorder. And so when you're suddenly placed in a situation where you've lost your identity in your place in school, among your friends, society, whatever, that can be difficult. And so college can be exciting, but also triggering for eating disorders. And in fact, college is, especially between the ages of 20 to, I think 22 to 24, a lot of college girls have disordered eating and develop bulimia, especially, and it's a huge problem. And there's a lot of pressure on campuses, and then. And depending on what your major is, if you happen to be in something like dancing, or some other liberal arts where body image can be of more importance, then that's especially triggering for eating disorders. And some I do I do therapy with some girls who are in college, and when they come in to see me, they talk about their roommates, and half the time, 2 or 3 girls in the apartment have eating disorders or have self-injury problems, major problems like that. And so, that's not just one girl in the whole dorm, it's like 2 or 3, and sometimes it can be worse than that. Sororities can be pretty bad. And so it's scary. And the biggest thing is finding your identity outside of, one of the problems that I think a lot of people have is finding their identity in other people, and not having a core sense of identity of who they are. That's one of the things that people that I talk to who struggle with the most, is when I ask them to identify goals and where they want to see themselves. And a lot of times they'll say, I don't want to know what your goals are about other people. Because some people say, well, I want to be married, I want to have a spouse, I want this and that, and it involves other people and other people's choices. And so I'll ask them to set goals of things that only involve themselves. And of people with eating disorders or a lot of addictive patterns a lot of times can't seem to find goals that are just them, that just only involve them, because they're so used to identifying with things outside of them. And when you're identifying with an eating disorder, that's really what you're doing, is you're identifying yourself, your core self, with things outside of who you are, because there's something that is scary about seeing who you are, and it's like we create this image of a black hole in us, and we feel like everything's just gonna suck in and implode if we don't have our eating disorder, we don't have things outside of us to identify who we are. And the problem with that is all those things around us change, and that will always continue to happen throughout life. And college a lot of times is the first experience that people have with that, because they've lived at home most of their life, good or bad, ugly, whatever it is for you. You've been usually in a core, with the family, you've grown up with the same people, and you've gone to school a lot of times with the same friends, and so you've had this identification. And if you've only identified yourself by your external surroundings and your relationships, then when you go off to college and you're suddenly not in that anymore, you've lost your identity and you don't have a core sense of self. And so it's very easy to take something like an eating disorder and make that your identity. And especially if you've struggled before, it can become even worse. Excuse me, I've got a little cough here. So that's, I think, really the crux of overcoming an eating disorder, is finding that identity within yourself and finding out, get beyond that black hole and looking into it instead of avoiding it and feeling that empty sense of pain and hurt. And that can be difficult, and it takes a long time. But if you can start to find things about you that you value, and one really good exercise to do this is to write down all the attributes that you admire about people, that you admire about your friends, because when you do that, you're really identifying the attributes that that are within you. Because, for example, if I value honesty and I value my friends who are honest, most likely I'm also an honest person, because if I didn't value that in a friendship, then it wouldn't be something that was in me. We value things that that are within ourselves. And when you can identify those values and understand that, that is the core of who you are, and all the external things that are on the outside that are changing, that we avoid looking at the inner self, because sometimes that can be scary and that can be raw. And when we identify with who we are, when people hurt us, then it's more personal, and we're afraid that they're going to destroy that little sense of goodness that is really bigger than we think, that's at our core. But if we can identify with something outside of us, then when people hurt us, they're not hurting this core person, they're hurting everything on the outside of who we think we are. And that's easier for us to deal with than with somebody hurting this inner core. And many of us have already been hurt at the inner core, and that's why we have this black hole around it, and why we are afraid to look at it. But you're going to go through so many life changes, and if you don't develop this sense of core, then it doesn't matter whether it's school or work or getting married or having a baby, that there's always going to be that upset that happens. And when that upset happens, you're going to be at risk for relapse or developing other addictive patterns. And that's really, I think, the key to a permanent recovery, is to be able to finally identify that sense of self. Because when you have that identity, things can hurt you. You can experience pain, you can experience loss, you can experience change in college, stress at work, whatever it is, and it may hurt and it may be difficult, but you have that inner sense of who you are, and it doesn't change that, because that doesn't change. All the external things change, and you can get through anything, and you have that confidence that you can get through it, and that you can find the support, and that you're a valuable person because you identify yourself by what you value instead of what all the external stuff. So I hope that makes sense to you, and get to it. It's almost 2010, and Woman, What's in Charge in 2010.